Oh, good evening, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here tonight and see so many friendly, familiar faces after the past couple of years, and also great to see a lot of unfamiliar faces, because that means new stewards, and that is so crucial to a strong and engaged union. As Christy mentioned, my name is Sychowski. I'm the president of the Vancouver District Labour Council, which represents approximately 60,000 union members across the city of Vancouver and neighboring municipalities in both the public and private sectors. And in this role that I have, I get invited to speak at a lot of different events. Well, I did prior to 2020 when they were happening. But I can honestly say that this Steward Seminar is my favorite. And the reason being for that, as many of you in this room will know, is that MoveUP was, of course, the first union that I became a member of. That was way back in 2007, when I got hired as a casual customer information clerk at Coast Mountain Bus Company. And my involvement with MoveUP, or Hope 378 as we were known at the time, moved quickly. I knew from day one, getting hired on there, I was excited to be coming into a unionized environment. My upbringing and my political beliefs meant that I was already a union supporter coming in to that, and it was only a matter of time before I got involved. And it didn't take long in those days for that to happen. This is before Twitter and Google sort of reversed call count trends, and it was within a few months that I became a part-time regular and then a full-time regular employee as a result of that. And as soon as I had that regular status, I dove in with both feet, became a steward and got involved. And it wasn't too long after that that I was at my first one of these seminars. The first of what would end up becoming many, both as a student and later as a facilitator, and now as a speaker. I stayed on in customer information at Coast Mountain Bus Company for a number of years, moving eventually from the call center to the technical support end as a database administrator. And as it turned out, the department was growing. It was growing at a pace which called for the creation of another executive counselor position. And so it wasn't long after becoming a steward that I found myself, with some apprehension, admittedly at the time, becoming an executive counselor. But that apprehension was unwarranted, is what I learned, because I found that this is a union that supports its young and new activists, that encourages their engagement. And I found myself with a number of mentors, with plenty of access to education through events like this, and with a healthy understanding when I occasionally misstepped, as sometimes enthusiastic young people are wont to do. But all of that helped me to continue my journey through the labor movement, becoming a member of the executive board of the union, coming onto the staff later, chairing in workers' committees, entering the leadership of the Labor Council, and ultimately becoming its president. And along the way, these Job Steward seminars, like this one here today, were a great source of learning and experience and inspiration throughout all of those years, going right back to those early days. Now, MoveUP has been for a long time known as a union which punches well above its weight, right? Whether that's in the political realm, or in labor disputes, or in community involvement. And this is why, right? Rooms like this, all of you are the reason for that. A union is as strong as its members, and its members are as strong as its stewards and the other leaders in the organization. And it's the commitment to developing that strength, encouraging involvement, providing education that's really exemplified by this seminar. And I believe it's key to our success as a union. So given all of that, I think this year's themes of connect, motivate, activate seem really perfect. After the past couple of years, it seems like those are the things we need to do. It's a pretty good summation of where we're at today as we come out of, hopefully, out of COVID. We've worked from home. We've skipped in-person activities. We donned our masks, and gone and got our vaccinations. And many of us have experienced job losses or disruptions of earnings. We've missed out and we've sacrificed. And it's been different for everyone, right? Some have had it harder than others, but it's been hard on everyone. I think that's fair to say. But thanks to doing that, and despite those who have worked against science-based solutions or refused to do their part, we find ourselves here today, right? Able to come together again in person and have events like this. And that's a big deal, and it feels really great, I have to say. A little weird, but really great to be here today and to see everyone again and be part of something like this. So, thank you to all of you who've done your part to make that happen. I attended the convention this fall. Some of you were there. It was a very energizing day when I was there, I have to say. And I feel that again today. You can really feel that activism, that energy sort of spark up again and just burn through that COVID haze that we've all been living in for these past 2 years. Not that MoveUP's activism ever stopped during those 2 years. I know that it obviously didn't. If anything, it was probably easier in a lot of ways dealing with all that entailed. But that sort of in-person energy that you just only feel when you're at an event like this, right? It was there, and it's charged back up, and it's clear people are ready to keep fighting for our members and for all workers. As I say, I feel that, again here today talking to folks since I got here this afternoon. And now it's time to look ahead to what this new normal that we're going to have is going to be post-pandemic, right? We all know it's not going to be exactly like it was before. Things have changed societally, economically, and we can't go back. And the question is whether we're entering a period now that's going to be better than 2019 or worse. And the labor movement has the potential to massively impact how that question is answered. One of the ways that we can do that is by electing progressive governments and then holding their feet to the fire to do what needs to be done to make that better option a reality. And that works, right? Just look at what's happened provincially, what's been able to be achieved with our NDP majority government, and the work the labor movement has done to not only elect them, but then hold them to account as well. We've moved minimum wage from the lowest in the country to one of the highest. Okay? We've implemented paid sick days. We've announced the return of compulsory skills trade certification. Long-awaited protections for workers and the public around asbestos abatement industry, right? Really important issue the labor movement has pushed for years and decades, and we're there. Unveiled a new economic plan, which the BC Federation of Labour has hailed as a dramatic shift from past governments and their failure to recognize the people at the heart of our economy, workers. These are just a few examples. To be clear, there's much more to be done. There always is. But it should also be clear that this government was elected in large part by Labour, and our continued advocacy on these issues has secured action which would not have occurred under the BC Liberal government. At the same time, during this term of office, the last 4 years municipally, Labour councils have successfully engaged with Labour-endorsed elected representatives to implement living wage policies in municipalities, to defeat privatization schemes, to enact progressive housing and tenants' rights policies, advance reconciliation and anti-racism, to back workers in contract disputes, and avoid contract disputes, frankly, as well, through respectful collective bargaining, to promote and implement harm reduction strategies and other measures to address the opioid crisis, to implement policies to address period poverty, to take action on climate change, and so much more. Political action works. And in BC in 2022, at the municipal level, is where one of the biggest impacts can be had on this front. Because on October 15th, you may not know this yet, but right right across this province, voters are going to cast their ballots in one of the biggest municipal elections, the biggest municipal election, I'm going to say, in a generation. It's going to be a day that's going to make a difference in your life, whether you know it yet or not. It's going to make a difference in the lives of all British Columbia residents, because that's the day that voters in this province will elect municipal councils, regional districts, school boards, and in Vancouver, park board. And I'll be the first to admit, we always say these are important, okay? Of course, because they always are, and because it's really fundamental to the purpose of the Labour Council, municipal political action. Most of the services that we access on a daily basis are controlled by local governments, whether that's roads, water and sewage, libraries, schools, parks, public transit, housing, land use. BC municipalities spend more than $8 billion every year. And how that money is spent makes a big difference in the lives of working people. But this time it really can't be overstated how important this is going to be. Because those elected on October 15th won't only take the reins for the next 4 years, they take the reins as we exit the pandemic and we decide what comes next. So they're going to decide whether we build a better future, right? Whether we take care of people through strong public programs and services and good jobs, or whether instead of that we prioritize tax cuts and incentives for the wealthy, abandoning working people and vulnerable members of our community defending themselves. Make no mistake, battle lines on this are drawn. This is already happening. And the outcome is going to impact you and your neighbors and your family. For the sake of example, take a look at the 2022 Vancouver budget, okay? It may not have been perfect, I grant, but progressive city councillors from across 3 different political parties came together with Mayor Kennedy Stewart and were able to pass a budget that put people first. With revenue shortfalls and uncertainty brought about by the pandemic and the inability by law to run deficits, it was clear that it was never going to be easy to chart a fiscal path forward for the city. It was a collective effort that centered putting people first during challenging times and acknowledging it was not going to be easy, it was not going to be perfect. But the budget passed narrowly against the opposition of 5 of the councillors, former nonpartisan association councillors. And for those not from Vancouver, Nonpartisan Association, or NPA, is the main right-wing party in Vancouver, essentially akin to the BC Liberals at the provincial level. The last time they were in office, we saw Sam's strike. People in Vancouver remember Sam's strike, I guarantee it. Over 5,000 municipal workers found themselves on picket lines for months as they fought for a fair collective agreement. It's best remembered for the fact that it was a sweltering hot summer and there was no garbage pickup. So, not a pretty sight or a smell, I can assure you. But I digress. The point is that these NPA folks have not changed their tune at all since that time. And they sought to sink the notion of a progressive budget and pursue an austerity agenda for 2022. The vote was 6-5. Narrow margin upon which the largest city in the province teetered between a progressive, compassionate approach and one that would sacrifice vulnerable members of our community, struggling working people and families at the altar of one. If they had their way, these are a few of the things that would have been cut. Funding for homelessness prevention, enhanced street cleaning, which had been enacted during the pandemic, funding to keep libraries open and operating, which are a crucial community hub, especially during the pandemic, and employ about 800 workers. Mental health supports at a time when people are under tremendous strain with everything that's going on both locally and globally. Initiatives aimed at fighting the overdose crisis, including an overdose outreach captain position at the Vancouver Fire Rescue Service. Backing the city's climate action plan with necessary resources. Funding the expansion of the fire service, which was canceled the previous year during the pandemic and is desperately in need of catching up to a growing population and demand for service brought on in part by the opioid crisis. The implementation of SRO vacancy control, which is a policy that protects housing for those who are one step away from homelessness. Reconciliation initiatives, such as a new full-time position to meet the city's demand for evolving Indigenous-related work, including the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and maintaining relations with the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. Implementation of early start actions related to the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls inquiry. The hiring of additional park rangers, given the expansion of parks and their increased usage, and more. These are some of the things that would have been cut if the budget had gone the way of austerity, the way that 5 of the 5 councillors, almost enough to make that happen, and voted. Literally hundreds of jobs would have been lost with this. Good family-sustaining union jobs. Lost by people who have already experienced layoffs of varying durations as a result of the pandemic. We know this agenda because we've seen it before. We've seen it before at the city and in other cities, and we've seen it before provincially from the BC Liberals. Many of your workplaces were impacted. Others, like the healthcare sector, were impacted even harder and are still trying to catch up from the damage done, which has negatively impacted our ability to respond to COVID and keep people safe and cared for. This time they hope to advance the same type of cuts and privatization agenda using the pandemic to stoke fear, to have alarmist warnings about economic catastrophe if we don't cut things, if we're not, if we don't reduce spending. But the truth is, we don't get out of this through cuts. We never get out of these things through cuts, right? That's not how it works, which is widely acknowledged by people who aren't the Fraser Institute, or the NPA, or the BC Liberals, or the Conservative Party, right? I'm not an economist, to be clear, but the logic is pretty simple, right? And there's plenty of economists who agree with this, right? Fewer people working is fewer people spending. There's fewer people paying taxes. There's fewer people traveling. It's less economic activity. It's not how we get out of an economic slump. What we need are investments in a stronger economy, a more just economy, just recovery for all, not cuts that put the bottom line before them. I use Vancouver as an example, but make no mistake, this is a provincial and even beyond that issue. The same debate is playing out across the province and will continue to do so until election day. Unfortunately, public education about municipal politics or municipal governance is lacking, and sort of public understanding of that is wanting. Municipal elections are notorious for low voter turnout. Often they're assumed to be of less importance than elections for senior levels of government, provincial and federal government. Not accurate in my view, but that's how it's viewed. But you can take the recent by-elections for Prince George and Mackenzie school districts, for example. Right? Those were just a few months ago. With a population of almost 77,000 in Prince George, 1,137 people turned out to vote. Not great. Mackenzie, a much smaller community, just over 3,000 residents, 114 ballots cast. The margins of victory for the successful candidates were 12 votes and 38 votes, respectively, in those elections. Those are the margins that put people on the school board there. And low turnouts and tight races aren't unique to smaller cities and communities at all. In 2018 election, very few cities saw higher than 40% turnout. Many major cities dropped over 30. The city of Vancouver had a 34% turnout. And Mayor Kennedy Stewart won thanks to Labour support by a margin of 957 votes. So this is not a small community problem, it's across the province. In fact, about 80% of Labour endorsed candidates, though this is the one good statistic, 80% of Labour endorsed candidates were elected. So it should be pretty clear to anyone who thinks participation doesn't matter, they got to give their head a shake, right? Labour movement's engagement in politics can make a huge difference. And as shown by the fact that most of our endorsed folks are in office. Labour movement doesn't, Labour movement's engagement though, has to be said, doesn't mean some abstract thing, right? It's not an abstract concept engagement. It doesn't mean someone else will do it, right? It means me, you, all of you, the people in your workplaces and in your communities. We're the people who have to do it, right? We're the people who get those people elected, the right people elected. We can't sit this one out. As complicated as things might be in a city like Vancouver, at least there are parties with clear records. And so, you can take a look and see fairly obviously where people stand and so forth. In most communities in the province, many of the communities in some of your province, not so straightforward because candidates run as independents. They're not necessarily under a party banner that identifies where they stand. But the good news is we have Labour councils who provide the invaluable service of making candidate endorsements. We do that work, figuring out where people stand and who supports where. And each Labour council works hard to identify candidates that shares Labour's values and will support working people. And they do so with an equity lens to try to ensure that we elect municipal governments that are more representative of the people that live in those communities. And usually candidates are asked first to complete a questionnaire, and then maybe they're shortlisted and interviewed. And it's a rigorous process to make sure that the right people are selected. Endorsement decisions are then made democratically by a vote of delegates representing the union locals affected, or affiliated rather, to the Labour Council. And once endorsements are made, then a full card with those endorsed candidates is produced and distributed to union members in a given municipality. And each Labour Council will engage in a variety of other activities to help to try to elect their chosen candidates. That's all a lot of work. And there's a job for everyone. Everybody can be involved with their Labour Council delegate or not. Here where we're standing right now, we're in the jurisdiction of the Fraser Valley Labour Council. They're doing this too. Everywhere that each one of you comes from, there's the Labour Council doing this work. And they're going to make a big difference on who gets elected on October 15th, so they need your help. Where my Labour Council, Vancouver, we share jurisdiction over the Metro Vancouver region with our friends at the New Westminster District Labour Council, and we're very excited to be cooperating with them on a joint campaign this year to elect Labour-endorsed candidates right across the region through a massive member-to-member campaign. And that campaign is obviously going to rely heavily on the cooperation of our affiliates to be able to reach union members and get out the vote. And I'm proud to say MoveUP has already stepped up as a champion of this initiative in those early preparatory stages. When the dust settles on this election, the Labour councils will forge a new model for municipal political engagement that I think will serve us well into the future. With a ban on contributions to political parties by the Labour movement and very strict limits on third-party advertising and spending, this new approach is a necessity. But further than a necessity, I really think that it has the potential to be a major win for our movement by directing our energies and our resources into a campaign which, of course, yes, supports our endorsed candidates and their election, but builds our capacity as a movement at the same time by directing those resources and energies into our own movement building and labor rather than dispersing them externally. I think it really has the potential to make Labour the campaigner rather than the funder of campaigns, so that on October 15th, we as a movement will elect worker-friendly candidates right across this province. So reach out to your Labour Council. Right? It's really important. If you're in the Metro Vancouver region, you can go to bdlc.ca and sign up to be part of our campaign. Before I wrap up, I really want to thank MoveUP, and its leadership for inviting me here tonight. It means a lot to get to join all of you, to catch up with friends and colleagues, and to continue to be part of the MoveUP family. And of course, it's really fantastic to speak to you all about the Labour Council and the upcoming election, which is our lives for the rest of this year at Labour Councils. So that is important, and I appreciate it. And especially since I know MoveUP is a union that is deeply engaged in the work of Labour Councils and in the political process, and that's something that everyone should be really proud of. For the next 2 days, you're all going to learn a lot about the ins and outs of grievance handling or arbitrations or a lot of these types of things, and that's all really important. In fact, the only reason I can't stay the whole weekend here with you is because I have to go back and facilitate a steward course for the Labour Council, so kind of ironically, but it's important, right? It's a crucial part of what we do, and it makes a huge difference. And it helps ensure healthy, safe, and fair workplaces, engaged members, and ensures our collective agreements, of course, and our union is strong. So, it's absolutely critical, and thank you all for being here and getting that education so that you can better serve those members. But we don't stop there, right? And that's why I wanted to focus a bit today on political actions, because we know our fight is for better workplaces, but it's also for better communities and for a better world, because nothing exists in a vacuum. All of those things are interconnected. Right? And it sounds like a tall order to say it, but together, organized working people, we're the ones, the only ones who can do that. So we take a stand in grievance meetings, we take a stand on picket lines, and at the ballot box, and in the municipal election campaign, please, and wherever else we have to win fairness and justice for working people and families. So thank you very much for taking that stand together, and wherever you are doing that, know that there's Labour Council behind you. Thank you so much, and have a great seminar.